Okay, so unfortunately I couldn't fix the chat section. I don't know what's up with that, but I'm going to continue with the talk, guys. So internal pathways to the heart of hearts. I was getting into this idea that the heart of hearts is suggesting the or heartbeat of a collective being. So right now we can say if man has a heartbeat, then in some sense imagine his planet, imagine his galaxy, imagine his universal sector, imagine the whole moment having a heartbeat. But the heartbeat of the whole moment is not in some sense the heartbeat of the individual body. It's just I'm saying that it's an attempt at seeing the world animate in a way where it hasn't before. So it's like the person can't see their heart, but they know it's beating. And so when it comes to the heart of hearts, the ultimate heart of existence, it's as if I find the mystic can feel it, can feel that heart, but cannot see it because it becomes the presence of the moment. You see, the objective realm and the subjective realm, the objective component to every moment, there's an objective component to every moment, and there's a subjective component to every moment. The subjective component has to do more with the instantaneous shift of the attention. When the attention changes, the inner reality structure changes. Another example of this is a person is looking at a battlefield, their inner reality is finding itself intense, chaotic. A person looks at a playground and, like remembers their childhood, when they were environment. That's why it's so profound. That's why it's a technology that is being used. Two human beings communicating means two inner realms integrating, to some degree at least. I chose this wallpaper. Unfortunately, I don't know who the artist is, but if anybody knows, give a shout out in the comment section. But this picture was incredible to me. It was a suggestion of where the light of it's like where sensory perception, where the vision of the external meets the vision of the internal. That's how this picture comes across to me. A person can find themselves to be a part of their world, or they can even reach a certain state where they think the world is part of them. There were certain mystics that walked this earth where they didn't think there was an earth outside. They felt the earth was in their eyes. I find the being to be an external, I find the body, the objective realm, to be externalized intelligence, and in some sense the subjective being internalized, in the sense that the subjective realm is like the roots of objective action and acknowledgement. So what does that mean? That means behind our eyes there is a world in which phenomenology from that inner realm influences the reality in front. So if all exploration of human experience was divided between what is in front of man's eyes and what is behind man's eyes, and if the reality of each view was being taken into consideration, the reality of the inner realms is, it's as if it works with different laws. It works with the opposite of externalities laws. What does that mean? That means I could totally see, for example, in front of me a cup with coffee in it, but I can totally, behind my eyes, visualize the cup made of coffee and the ceramic to kind of be the liquid in it. So what I mean by that is the mind has an ability to see the reverse of a conscious objective design, so it sees this unconscious subjective design in some sense. By the way, guys, if anybody wants to share something, because the chat section is off, if you write it in the comments of the video, I'd also be able to respond there as well. Oh my God, comments are turned off too. What is this? What is this? think I know why. Just hang in there, guys. Just hang in there. I think I figured this out. Why the chat section isn't working. Okay, chat section's back, guys. I think this is gonna work now. The heart of hearts. In ancient mystical traditions, they considered that there wasn't just the eyes of the person. There was also the eyes of, there wasn't only the biological eyes, there was also the eyes of the mind, or they would consider it the eyes of the heart. There's a story from a man named Hafez. In his poetry, he writes a story. This man was a Sufi mystic from 700 years ago, and the story begins where Hafez is chilling, and he's, with his disciple in some housing area, and Hafez suddenly says in his poetry, it's as if he saw something from the eyes of his heart. And so Hafez gets a vision in his meditative kind of contemplation, and he gets this vision, and his heart sees another part of the fields of this world. And so his heart sees that there is a cave far away, like at a certain location, and in the cave there is a slave. This is 700 years ago, take this into consideration. And there's a slave who has ran away from some household, and the slave has made it to this cave. And as the slave is in the cave, the slave is praying to God, saying, God, please help me, please help me, please help me not to go back into that hell. Hafez instantly gets an intuitive command, and he looks at his disciple and he says, the eyes of my heart has seen something that you must do. And he tells the disciple that the disciple has to go exactly, Hafez gives him like the GPS location. And he tells his disciple, there's one thing you have to, it's a condition, is that he tells the disciple, you cannot tell, you have to go bring this slave here so we can free him. We can free this slave, and in some sense he can return to his true social mind. And what happens is, the disciple trusts Hafez and goes. He gets on a horse and begins riding to the exact address that Hafez gave. And Hafez goes and takes a seat into his heart of hearts again. And so what happens is, the disciple is running. He's like, yes, we're going to save this guy, and he runs. He runs there and he finds the cave and he sees the disciple and he's so happy, and he's like, I'm going to, this man's going to be free. And he runs there. And of course, Hafez told them that they have a certain time to get the guy out before he's found again. And so what happens is, the disciple goes there and suddenly realizes that he's not allowed to say a single word to this man, but he has to free him and take him out of this place. And so he goes there, and the guy there, the man in the cave who's praying and who's freaked out, and he's like, God help me, suddenly sees Hafez's disciple, and instead of being cheerful, he thinks the master of his household has found him, And so it's this messed up thing where this slave in the cave who's praying to be saved suddenly sees the disciple, but thinks the disciple wants to take him back to the hell he ran away from. The disciple manages to take the guy. He ties like a rope around his hand and connects the rope to the horse. And the whole time, as they're going back, he's taking the man who was trying to escape back to Hafiz's place. The whole time, the slave is crying. The slave is just shouting, "Please, God, I don't want to go back. Please help me." Like some savage kind of frenzy of needing to be saved. And in that whole time, the disciple is just crying because he realizes what Hafiz was trying to teach him. And he realizes that sometimes in life you may feel you're in chaos, but the order is very close by. And so the disciple starts crying because he realizes this man who thinks he's going back to chaos is actually going to order, but the way to order is chaos. In the darkest hour of night comes the light. In the darkest moments of reality suddenly comes that freedom. There's a threshold of chaos that is allowed. There's certain ranges of chaos that is not allowed to be seen by the eyes of the being. And what I mean by that is that life cannot, it's like it doesn't crush you with chaos. It's like at the end of that chaos, you just discover an order. At the end of the order, you discover a chaos, and hence the karmic wheel keeps spinning. Hafiz in that story, and of course how the story ends is the disciple is brought back. He's suddenly, the ropes from his wrist is freed, and he's kind of like giving good clothing and acknowledged in Hafiz's household as, a free being of the universe. Now, the reason, to be honest, I shared the story is because I wanted to give the audience this idea that sight is not just visual. It is instantaneous, it is intuitive, and it has to do with a sort of balance, intuitive balance. And intuitive balance means, the same way you're aware of objects, you also become aware of subjects. Did you know back in the day, I think that somebody was saying this about like Aztec and Mayan times in our history, the Mayans, in some sense, they were at a part of evolution where thoughts were emerging and the person didn't know what thought was. So suddenly there came this thought, run that way. It's like, and the person just reacted. So it was as if we did not have a sophistication back then with our subjective realm. We reacted to it. We just were impulsive. Like somebody came and said, "You're a bad man." And the person was like, "Oh no, I'm a bad man." The person would go insane, because they would react to worlds that were imposed in their space. You see, you have to kind of understand in life, you choose the intensity of what happens to you based on your involvement and acknowledgement of the phenomena. This world is filled with various, what's the term, axi, like various axes. And what I mean by that is that just like how the earth has a tilt, the psychology of every human being has a tilt, and it's the fundamental dualism that they're, in some sense, the first, their principal archetype, their original archetype, the first thing that creature felt it had to be. It's like filled with layers. Right now, if we were to, let's say an extraterrestrial came down and wanted to comprehend the human being, it would see the various layers, as if a human being doesn't just walk alone in the moment, it walks in with the senses of self, of all the memories that it has existed in, or those in access, in conscious access. There are certain phenomenologies of the mind that you can only watch. There are certain phenomenology of the mind that it works and moves with your consciousness. So what does that mean? That means it's like there's an object in the room right now. Now I can choose to just see this object, or I can choose to move it. And sometimes with subjectivity in the internal subjective realm, it's kind of like thoughts are moving like a river. It's as if your mind is an antenna. And it's like these rivers, at least in my experience, there's a kind of, I give always this metaphor that it's like rivers of thought are moving, and it's as if it's at night and I've taken this, this is the best metaphor. Imagine it's like the unconsciousness, the mystery of imagination. It's like there's a river moving at night. The person can hear the sound of the river, but they cannot see the river. Okay? So imagine me and everybody who's listening to this talk right now, imagine me and you are in some kind of like cottage area beside a river, and it's night, right? And we don't see the river, but we hear it. So the same way the person experiences imagination and visualization, it's as if, okay, you know there is something, but you can't see all of it, right? So now imagine everybody who's there alongside Mr. Within, we take we take a flashlight and we point it at the river at night. Suddenly, everything in the conscious range of that flashlight that is moving becomes observable. So what I feel, at least I'm doing in these talks, is that I am taking a conscious spotlight and putting it on my unconscious. And the conscious spotlight is one where it's like you throw an idea just to see how it is. It's as if like the father in that Spartan movie 300, when the father was like threw the child with a spear into the forest, and he's like, after you kill a wolf while jumping backwards, I'll accept you. You know, so the kid was on some level like, how cruel, how messed up, but on some level the kid had to confront chaos early on. You know, but the father did this to test the child. We are human beings that test everything, do we not? We test the thoughts that we have. We test the safety of our environments, even the safety and security of our environment. So for me, it's like I get it. It started off from unconscious movement of nature. A part of nature became conscious. A part of nature became so conscious, it became conscious that it was conscious. When it became conscious that it was conscious, it took all the designs of the external realm and realized that there was a trust of subjective movement of it. Do you see? So that means it is much easier for me to see an object and visualize it than my mind instantly visualizing a totally different object. So I had to get acquainted to this, because in 2014, when I decided to give these 10,000 talks, it wasn't a decision from my rational mind. It was a decision from the rationality of the future, which would always seem irrational now. That means it's as if like nobody is saying in this life that you have to be irrational, but rationality in different moments of history has different implications. There's different levels, different balances of phenomenology. That means right now, if I ask you what is normal to you, and then I go ask your friend what is normal to you, and then I go ask the friend of your friend what is normal, and eventually we'll see it's the evocation of what the experiencer has accepted. That means normality becomes a hoax. Every person is looking at the world from the world they see. Now that is when civilization needs a voice. I'll tell you, there's inspiration. The inspiration, at least for the human personality, internally appears as a voice. Externally, it appears as an action. That means the most profoundest external thing that can happen to a thought-inspired action is like that thought becomes manifest. So, for example, when I say these words, when I give this talk, certain subjective designs behind my eyes suddenly are finding their feet in a sort of more of a materialistic environment. What that means is we are pilots of language. We are in some sense the pilots of consciousness, you know. And in history, when you go see the great philosophers, when you go see all the great writers, all those people who in some sense let the midnight oil burn as their fingers ran into the empty streets of an empty page, you know, it's like it becomes incredible, guys, when the importance of the moment reaches its ultimatum. It's as if it's like, how important is every moment? You suddenly realize there's a potential for it to be ad infinitum. There's this saying, they say ad nauseum ad infinitum. Pretty much the person is their mind is noticing the potential of expansion to be so vast that it becomes nauseating to even keep stability in the moment. What does that mean? That means if there was, I think our species in 2019 has reached a point where it has not just mastered the elemental realm, it has not just mastered the ethereal, the subjective realm, the ether-born world. The external knows It is conditional. But the internal reality doesn't know that it's unconditional. And there is no such thing, guys. The concept of enlightenment was a riddle that was saying it's an unconditional state in a conditioned universe. That means it's as if the mind has to skip the meal of its own creation. So what does that mean? That means it's like the complexity, or I don't want to say complexity, but the hardship or the challenge part of the mystical practice towards the ultimate state was the fact that it's like the person's life is as if they have made a meal. Imagine you make the perfect meal and you're sitting at the table and the meal is right there, but it's as if the mystical kind of ancient advice of the sage was like, don't eat that meal. Don't eat the meal of your own creation. And it's very hard. It's very hard to be aware of what is beyond in any category. One thing every branch of knowledge shares is the space between the branches, the sky that is witnessing all. Here is something that perhaps is not said often, that there is two edges to the world of an external journeyer. Either the external reality is endlessly explored, or the edge, one edge is infinity to the external dimension, the other edge is emptiness, it's absence, it's the void. Now, in life, I'm going to ask you, imagine your mind is a room. Let's take this analogy. Now, I want to first entertain the singular room before I talk about it as a multidimensional room. But imagine your mind is a room. Imagine every experience you have had, every archetype that dwells in your mind, every a fathomable design from any sort of memory or emotional range of access. Imagine in this room, your life experiences are furniture in this room. For example, in one moment, in your childhood, you fell from a bike and you hurt your knee. Okay? That experience becomes a sort of furniture in your conscious moment of wonder. Now imagine the furniture in the room requiring you not only having an ability to reposition the content of your mind, but you having an ability to take out the furniture in some sense and totally bring in new furniture. That means instead of you being defined by who you were in the past, you could totally be defined by your future self. You know, I've met so many, more than enough people who entertain the notion of past lives. Now, if you can entertain the notion of past life, guess what? You can entertain the notion of a future life. You know, I've been known to say in other talks that just like how the body is going from the past to the present, the future is going from the future to the present. That means my present moment right now is the past of my future self. But at the same time, my present moment is also the future self of my past. Do you see? So it's like, because the analogy can be played with, you can it's like when life is discovered as that empty piece of paper where you can redraw the meaning. So it becomes more than it. So it's kind of like what I'm saying here to you guys is that when you become aware of your inner space, and you have enough comfort with your inner space, just like you have with your outer space, when you can trust the subjective rooms your conscious mind archetypally exists in, when you can see all your archetypes at once, you are beyond archetypes. And believe it or not, guys, this is the ultimate truth of this plane of existence. It doesn't matter if it's set in a spiritual context, non-spiritual context, whatever context. The truth is you require one honest moment where the mind can be a mirror for the soul. So I kind of looked at it and I realized, look at this meditative act. Look at what meditation is doing. It's making the body still, and when the body is still, the body begins to mirror the mind. Like a surface of a pond where the water has settled, it begins reflecting what's looking at it. So when a person sits down, if your physical body is still for 10 to 20 minutes, and literally you're just still, you see that the mind becomes aware it's there. Anytime the physical body becomes static, the mind's dynamism is understood, is made aware of. Now, if you sit longer and you sit timelessly, there's a way to sit, there's a way to be at the doctor's office or be at the bank lineup where you're standing there as if there's time is a factor. Time can sculpt your psychology, or you can stand timelessly. There's many moments in my life where I had to wait, and I was like, okay, time to enter a timeless moment. And I sat in that moment. It was like hours I had to wait, but those hours were no longer, I was not experiencing time as a duration. I was experiencing just one moment. Kind of like how Alan Watts says, it's like when you have to wash like 100 dishes, like each dish, instead of thinking you're washing 100 dishes, just imagine you're trying to wash one dish perfectly, so it doesn't matter which dish comes. Every moment is trying to have its great effort. So when the mind also becomes still after the body is still. Now check this out, guys. This is I find this to be an incredible observation I've made. So when the objective, I'm not going to say objective, when the physical, biological body is still, the mind becomes aware it's moving. Now, when the mind somehow becomes still, the consciousness will see that it's the consciousness moving, and the easiest way I've found at least to approach it is that you're a creature of attention there. So you are attention being a creature, but before that you're a creature having attention, projecting attention, right? So it's like the conditional is leading to the unconditional, but eventually it reaches a state for the mystic where the unconditional is moving the conditional. So the condition is not the power source, it's not the definer. So whatever condition the conscious mind finds itself, it suddenly realizes its unconscious is witnessing it beyond it. You want to know a secret, guys? Something that Carl Jung, I think even Freud caught onto it, but he couldn't say. Carl Jung definitely couldn't say, but I feel I can. Because I'm at a moment of history where it's like Carl Jung had to make a certain speech. But I could tell you is that the conscious mind will be realized to be unconscious. It's rooted as the unconscious. So what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that you who are trying to know thyself will realize that it's the unknown knowing itself. It's not the known transcending endlessly into higher formations. That means we have to snap out the society that is treating its world as pictures and realize that it's a dynamic, co-creative, co-integrative movie, a film. Life is a film you're the main actor in. Now that incredible observation is the sense that anytime a body moves, I would play football, soccer when I was a kid a lot. And I would play like a lot, like to a point where my home in Iran had this long hallway, and I would just put just chairs, and start running with the ball at a fast speed in a very short space, dodging the chairs. So I would play, I was in some sense obsessed with mastering control over a sphere. But I noticed that anytime my body was moving at an intensity, the mind would instantly become still. So in emergencies, why is it that the intelligence of the person is accelerated? It's because the mind instantly accepts its static view. You know, in emergencies, in any experience that is externally really turbulent, I'm telling you, you become a mind that's projecting a body. Anytime a certain range of freedom with the movement of the external, any times the external reality gets moved more than your framework of how that condition should be kept, uh, uh, the inner dimensions begin moving more. So I want you to think that you have two bodies. But the other one, the subjective body, is not a physical body, it's the whole projective space. So it's like we have one physical body and a mind that can see endless parallels to this body. So you see, the body is the tool for the mind to know itself. The mind is the tool for the unconscious consciousness to know itself. The unconscious mind to know itself. The unconscious. When you look at many Abrahamic traditions, they acknowledge a divine will that is moving their free will, so they submit their free will and their archetypes get, it's as if it's kind of strange. It's just like how we have baptism, just like how we have Tawbah in Islam, we have baptism in Christianity, and I forget the term, but in Judaism there's also purification practices. In many religions and many practices, it's as if it's like the whole point of the ritual and the ceremony was the conscious acknowledgement of a new start. So in intense movement, times where I've ran or I've been in a certain external rhythm, you know, even times where I would be at the gym, and the whole purpose of going to the gym is you want to see how far your muscles can go. So it's like whatever exercise you do, eventually you realize it's about taking the muscle to an extreme point, but not beyond a level where it's kind of like you break yourself a little bit, but not completely, and that broken part readjusts with all the other parts that are fixed. You know, so it's taking the objective to a certain extreme with a subjective monitoring. Now, Mr. Within is saying that the same way we treat our body, we can treat our mind. So when you see your body in the mirror, you might be like, yo, I can't see my mind in the mirror, Mr. Within. And I'll tell you, technically, you don't see your mind. The mind sees the you. The mind is not a conditional phenomena, it's unconditional. That's why the word creativity exists. Many archetypes are living in this world. It's not just people who are walking in the streets, many ideologies walk in the street. A human being without a thought is either a field of intelligence or, in some sense, is the world. That's the profound thing, guys. I've said that the educational systems on this planet will experience a subjective apocalypse. The realization that language was sparked like fire. It was invented. Language is an invention. And this invention, and I think more than an invention, it could also be considered as a discovery, because it was the moment where objective phenomena gained more animative potential as we categorized and separated. So check out the mind. Look at how advanced the human mind is, guys. the moment of intelligence where the human being finds itself. It not only separated itself, from the world through a name, it also separated many objective objects in the world with names. I find the easiest way to stop progress is to distract it. The easiest way to prevent a masterpiece from being made is by turning the master into pieces, fragmenting the intention of the being. I find life it gives a potential for the person to be 100% joyous. But as long as the mind is conditional, the joy has a picture, and if that picture is not found, the person will not allow themselves bliss. We find ourselves at a moment in history where a globalization movement has not only led to many human beings sharing what is behind their eyes in the same digital space, but it's for the first time cultures are infusing their influence. Like, think about it, guys. The person lives in China, imagine, and the person goes on the internet and suddenly sees how a person is living in Dubai. A person is living in Dubai and suddenly goes and sees how a person is living in America. A person who's living in America suddenly goes and sees how a person is living in Holland, for example. So it becomes one of those things where there is an access to more archetypes, therefore meaning a more creative stage for new archetypes to present. The whole thing about the only reason laws require to be updated is because new archetypes have new worlds they're acknowledging. So on some level, a part of civilization should free the ability to create. A part of civilization should, in some sense, have a freedom to change what is created. And in some sense, a part of civilization has to have an ability to end what has changed. So you see, every archetype has this. This is something where any sense of persona that the human being projects, in some sense, your personality, it has freedom to act. That freedom to act is a suggestion of the inner landscape and how it's being kept by your attention as a being. Something that could never have been said, and even if said, they just gravitate to paradoxical realities. Any ideology that quickly finds itself paradoxical, guys, is not from this world. That means what was inside Pandora's box was a paradox, and it blew the eye of individuality into the pieces of a collective vision. I am telling you, life is not just about who you think you are. Life is about how thought moves, how thought lives. That means this is what I call, of course, I consider every person listening. I just see like all moments of intelligence, I either see them as advanced communicators, human beings as advanced communicators, or pilots. And pilots are not for like, I consider mainly there are many of them will come in the future generations. What does that mean? A pilot is a being actually moving as a collective field. So it's as if in their experiential moment of intelligence, the experience has been understood to be more than just a color of the moment. Marcus Aurelius says the soul is dyed with the color, with the color of it, with the colors of its thought, the color of its thoughts. The soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts, and the word dyed means painted. So it's like painted with the color of its environment. A pure thought is a thought that doesn't require an individual consciousness to keep it there. It's a statue in the subjective realm. That's a pure thought. It's like asking the same way of wondering what the meaning of human life is. It's like looking at a candle and wondering what the purpose of the flame is. And the purpose of the flame is to reveal the room. The purpose of consciousness is to be a design. And so you become a robot in society. It just means that after you have observed objects, after you have observed subjects, you will then go on observing the rhythms that blend the two, which become emotional fields. And after you have walked past those emotional fields, you will come into the true unknown. The true unknown is hilarious, and also it's like the best version of you and the worst version of you see something so awe-inspiring, so next level that they both start crying. And so on some level, it's like from one of your eyes there's tears of joy coming, and from the other eye is tears of sorrow. The tears of sorrow is what could not be kept. That means it's like our emotions make us promise the world that we will be there for it. But reality is a maintenance, or better yet, it's like your mind. Like when I wake up in the day, I'm like, all right, another day to surf objective based conception and subjective based conception. For me, every day is an exploration, because if it isn't, then life has closed the box. You see, your mind is as vast as the universe it can see, is it not? That means I thought, how hilarious, right? People are saying, like, in some sense, I'm from this nation, I'm from that nation, and I looked at it and I'm like, if we want to take ownership, take pride in space, why not take pride? We're all cosmic beings, why not have a sort of cosmic based narrative, for the archetypal history of the being? You know what that means? That means if your mind has an ability to feel it is colored by it, if your moment is dyed in the color of the land, like, guys, I'm telling you, I appreciate nature. I love nature, but I know that there is something that surpasses phenomenology. It's not about just, I talk about nature because the society is becoming too mechanical too soon. We have to consider that we cannot have our minds be blind to the civilization's progress. That means I feel that the greatest minds on this planet, they will get angry internally. And this anger is not like a chaotic tyranny anger. It's an anger of unborn justice. It is the anger of seeing the better, but seeing it not manifest. It's as if, for how long in our subjective realms shall we seek paradise but not build it on earth? For how long? How many children must open and close their eyes until we see there is the sight of the species here? People are defined by their actions and their actions or movements into various environments. If you notice, if you do something externally really wrong, your internal realm will let you know about it. When you go against your own nature, the nature locks down. Your intelligence knocks down. When you lie to yourself, your intelligence closes. The turtle goes in the shell. So intelligence for the future generations is not going to be accumulated articulation. It's going to be rhythmic abidance as kind of new evolutionary experiencers. I find that this is the task of the advanced communicator and the pilots of consciousness, which is another way of saying all human beings must contribute to this cocoon of an agenda. There's this idea that the wise man plants trees that he will not be sitting under their shade. What does that mean? Is that the ideas of human beings, the efforts of the minds of human beings echo longer in history than just the body. That means Socrates' physical existence was maybe, I don't know, like when he died, he was maybe in his late 80s or something. I don't know. But when Socrates, his body died, his voice stays with us today. The fact that I can Google a Socrates quotes means Socrates said something that the universe was like, this man's voice needs to linger. So you see, the mind is like that tree planted. The voice of the human being and its ultimate contribution to the ideological landscapes that human beings have to confront every day. The voice of your mind lives longer than the movements of your physical body. Or has the potential to do so, at least. Nobody knows what nature shall evoke. When you take into consideration the fear and the duration, the timeline we give the universe, which is like billions of years, and from a pool of energy, there was a big bang that cooled down, you know. The mind is an ultimate servant, but if the being does not take responsibility, and responsibility internally is just being honestly willing to see something. You don't understand. Honesty is freedom of the intelligence. Literally, your inner realms are comfortable to move because they have no reason to distrust the world. You see, I find a lot of stress occurs in the modern mind, especially it's going to occur for a lot of children that are going to be born into this world. That stress is going to be the inability to make the future smile. I find human nature at its core is, because we start off as children, just think about it, guys. The child's view is more simpler. So guess what? From many simple translations of reality in the moment, as we take laps around the sun, we in some sense mature into complexities. So it's as if life is not just about the books you read, but it's about the minds you witness. The true questions of living, that it's like when you find a soul, when you find a question that comes from your soul, it's as if the world's answers immediately come. One honest moment and a new humanity can arise. A new human behavior. And behaviors tend to be contained in stories. You tell yourself a new story, you simply are a new character. This doesn't mean forgetting who you are, it just means realizing evolution means something has to change. And believe it or not, since 10 years ago, did you know the biological body, the cells of it, certain cells of it change every 2 weeks, and they say, of course, the cells of the brain change in years, but it's like Like you have a completely new biological body since 10 years ago. And because you have a new biological body and you've accumulated a vast array of experiences, you also see the subjective realm is no longer the same. What that means is every new experience of your life changes who you are. So there's no point of trying to keep the past alive when the future is already here. And when I say not keeping the past alive, I mean internally speaking. Externally, I think this world has to start giving medals to scribes. Just like how editors are treated in the film industry, many people don't acknowledge the incredible work that editors do. Yeah, similarly, as the correct question is found. You know, to be honest, the solution and question are both extracted from the same moment. The contentment and discontent of the human being is a phenomenon in the same moment. The mind can be seen as an ally or the mind can be seen as an opposition. A human being that resists something in the world should be very cautious because resistance externally means that the mind has to assume that even though it's being the whole moment, it has to resist a part of itself. You know, so imagine right now with your right hand you grab your forearm and you start squeezing it like incredibly, like just start crazy, like in an intense way squeezing your forearm. You'll see that it's as if you are resisting something that you are. And when you realize everything that you see that you think is another is actually your mind's display, that means for the first time the human being has to accept that if there is any truth, any sort of multidimensional speculation, whatever it is, it has to come from the moment where the fire is lit. The candle is lit, the candle of consciousness, the flame is lit in the moment. Right now, as I'm speaking, in my conscious moment, think of like this intelligent communication, this like just speech as like the flickering of the candle flame and my biological body as the body of the candle. So this candle realizes that due to its temporary kind of presence, every day happens once kind of ordeal. So the being has to attempt the unknown in some way. When you attempt the unknown, you have to resolve the situation of your mind. This life is not about just being puzzled, it's about solving the puzzles given, you know? What can an evolutionary animal do upon gazing at an endless sky and a vast void that holds pebbles and light beams? To be honest, we have to make the best of it, which means we have to see the greatest potential, but the greatest potential is not desire oriented or fear directed. You see, I found it kind of unique, but in many Eastern practices, fear of the source of creation is the start of wisdom. And fear means acknowledgement of what is there. Sometimes in life, the freedom of awareness to acknowledge design is bliss. All right, guys, I need a quick intermission. I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay. To continue, in the intermission, guys, I was thinking about what's a great way I could explain this internal pathways thing, you know. And really, what it is in many metaphysical, you can say, ideological movements on this planet, upon the emergence of the idea of the soul, there came the idea that if the person has a soul, then it's like the planet has a soul, then it's like the galaxy has a soul, and then it's like the universal, the exist cosmic sector has a soul. And so it becomes one of those things where eventually you realize manifestation is being navigated through a consciousness that by navigating through the manifest feels it's unborn. So you find the sight of the unborn intelligence within, in some sense. The mind can be seen as a pond, and as the archetype in the moment floats in this pond, noticing that the sky of the world is also connected, the microcosm, the edge of the micro is the macro. The edge of the individual conscious being is the collective. We have to dictate the relationship with anything else. It's like at the end of time, one gets judged by the hammer that's in their own hand. And this picture, guys, that's in the background is so incredible. Like the person who drew this was needs to be given some sort of award, because look at how the girl is floating in the pond, but her hair is floating in outer space. Her head is in has moved beyond the stars. An evolutionary return to nature, the resurfacing of uh, an individual conscious being trusting the collective unconscious. Many people pay attention to freedom, but few people pay attention to the source of freedom, the creator of freedom, the internal authorization required for many fascinating ways the mind can externally move. It's about having a living relationship with the moment rather than an inanimate and on the table movable object like kind of relationship with the world. You don't want the world too much in your control. I'm telling you guys, it's unhealthy for a mind to have everything under control all the time. It leads to inner chaos, because you need to have a balance between chaos and order, and what appears truly chaotic is what is above your control. So what it is imagine the person waking up and that being like 50% a known state and 50% an unknown state, right? So now imagine as chaotic things happen, the unknown state increases. As ordered things happen, the known state increases. So it's an oscillation. So it's a percentage of from 50-50 going to maybe 55-45, and vice versa, going a certain measure. So it's a certain range, right? The attention really dictates it. Think of it this way: you cannot have a free self if there's not a free world that self is in. And this is when the rights of one human being become the rights of another, and it's a fascinating moment. It's when the decency of the experiencer within readjusts and realigns to what is truly important. And we have to realize the experience of the conscious being must be protected. It's a pillar of civilization. That means, for example, when one human being, causes chaos for other human beings, that human being, of course, we have to treat like another living mind, But it can also be in a dynamic where even if technology in the future wanted to enter, like imagine we wanted to connect our brains to computers, that possibility came. What can be said? The archetypal mind will evolve into a field. The person's relationship with their inner realm will become instantaneous, so it will become timeless. So behind your eyes, you will feel like you're a timeless phenomenon, timeless being. But in front of your eyes, because you must require and maintain the individual conscious intelligence, that means the ego is not something to throw away, it is something to befriend. What that means is the acceptance of the inner realm will lead to great contentment to the outer realm, but the acceptance of the inner realm also harbors the responsibility of bringing forth novelty in the void. And what that means is your mind has to now become alert and attentive to the voice of not just your species, but the planet. What that means is man's relationship with the stars depends on his relationship with the earth. So right now it means our new archetypes are being born with more collective mindsets, more collective considerations. For example, in the future, a child might get upset that, imagine there's a young child walking and they see like this adult throw trash and the trash doesn't hit the trash, go inside the trash, it hits the side of it and falls to the ground. And this young child goes, in some sense, to this man and says, okay, sorry guys, sometimes when I speak, there's you can say an emotional intensity that builds a momentum, and if I'm slightly, my attention is a little bit off. I don't know how to say it, but it's like the vision shifts. In this talk, none of my sides are good or bad, because duality is not the immediate voice. For me, life is an opportunity for experience to occur. A certain range of that experience is in conscious control. A certain range of that has to be mindful of how the unknown and the unconscious moves. In these talks, I'm simply trying to make the world, mankind, a sort of, how can I tell you, a complex. I want to bring its complexity to light for then it, to understand how the simplicity can arise. The idea I wanted to finish off in some sense. This kid, imagine, looks at this person and says, "How dare you throw a piece of trash?" Imagine a young kid going to this person who threw the trash. And the guy says, "What do you mean, kid? Relax, it's just a piece of trash." And the kid is getting angry, not because the trash was thrown, was because the person did not have a sort of great thoughts are born out of the void. Many things, it's like just from silence, noise emerges, from stillness, movement emerges. You know, the relationship of both of these can lead to a sort of subjective, you know, experience. There's um, there's a saying some people say that some things are written in the stars. And a person who, for example, looks at the pyramids of Egypt sees them, their points kind of beaming towards Orion. The macrocosm, if observed, means the microcosm is all seen as one. So, to a macro perspective, the micro doesn't exist. To the micro, the macro is not fathomable. So, in our conscious waking state, we're limited to our individual consciousness. But when this individual consciousness that identifies with a certain pattern deviates from that pattern, suddenly it's as if, like, imagine you not having new thoughts, but you experiencing all the thoughts you have in a new way. You see, attention is a light, is it not? Ideas, in my view, they live in human attention. You go ask, imagine, like if a thought could speak, it would just say, "Where is the attention that I could live in?" You know, the soul of the soul of the soul, as Attar would say, the heart of hearts, as I say. And there are many who, after some point, life is not even an ideological phenomenon for them. That's the I find the more advanced life gets, the less resistance there is to the inefficient. There's less resistance to the efficient. It's a fascinating world we live in. If even if there was no TV, the imagination is kind of like a subtler screen. You know, right now, if I was to tell you, imagine there's a lightsaber in your hand and you can choose the color, and imagine you're holding a lightsaber. Now that imagine the lightsaber, it has a design. You can visually acknowledge it, but sub-visually, acknowledge it. But it's not. There's no lightsaber in your hand. So the mind can, in some sense, this is the subjective realms. In like this is what makes it interesting that a design can be projected, but the design doesn't manifest. Like I have to speak that just because I think the talk, it's like it doesn't happen. I have to vocalize it, you know. So it's like a species studying its inner environment. We explored the outer realm, now we're studying the inner realm, and eventually we're going to realize it's one moment. And after we realize it's one moment, there's going to just be a freedom to see the world as any moment, as any kind. There comes the creative freedom of your inner realm becomes instantaneous. The world is too big to be contained in small words. All I know is that if there is something that requires to be done by the free will, if the free will has any sort of intention or purpose, it's like it has to do with direction and speed. So imagine the person stops trying to, for a second, just like stops thinking about the past or future and just looks at the moment, where they're existing in the moment, and just wonders what is a speed I can maintain. This is in regards to the subjective and the direction of this speed. It's as if the velocity of vision. Yeah, I like that. The velocity of vision. So when you wonder about direction and speed, how important the destination is will suggest your speed, and the destination you see, it's like how far you have studied your own intelligence will suggest how much you can use it, I think. Zen Master Dogen has this quote where he says to study Buddha's way, he says you got to study the self. That means not study per se an external object, but to study this external object that has an internal experience. So Zen Master Dogen says to follow Buddha's path is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to wake. Okay, here, I'll hold back here. He says to study the self is to forget the self. What does that mean? To study the self is to forget the self. That means whatever you want to study, you have to be able to observe it. In order to be able to observe something, you have to be outside of it. So the only way the person can study the self is to realize they are not the self they thought they were. So it becomes a forgetting of the self, a return to the void space. So when you forget the self, that means for the first time, it's like this witnessing observer within has no opinion and is watching the opinion. Has no opinion on the opinion, you know? So it's like when you can observe the self, that's when the self has been forgotten and it's being studied. You can see the self without being it for a second, for an instant. And then the third part of the code, the rest of the code is to forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. So look at what he's saying. He's saying, you want the ultimate truth. So if you want the ultimate truth, study the self that is asking the question. Okay? So when you study that self, you come to see if you can observe it, you are not it. So while the person wonders to go see what is the question, it's kind of realizing like a detachment.
It's realizing that that observer, that moment where a self can be seen to be studied, is the ultimate. Freedom to consciously navigate. It's as if, how can you have freedom of speech if you don't have freedom of mind? And if you don't have freedom of mind, that means you don't have a freedom to observe thought. All right, guys. One last story to share. The story is from Rumi's poetry, and he speaks about this romance between a robot, sorry, not a robot, between a moth and a candle flame. And this moth, for many years, you can say for eons, is in love with this candle flame in Rumi's poetry. The moth, eventually, one of its wings hits the flame, and as it is falling, suddenly there's this Rumi, this poet from 700 years ago, gave a dialogue. It made it kind of like gave personalities to the moth and the flame. And in some sense, the flame, the moth says, "How could you burn me?" The flame says, "How could you burn?" The moth says, "How could you burn me? All these nights I have been flying around your flame, trying to keep you from the loneliness of this cosmic existence." And the flame says, "How could you feel I would burn you? I have been burning bright all these nights trying to keep you warm." And so it's this kind of profound metaphor for the archetypes in life and how they move. So, anyways, guys, that's the story. Anybody who wants to engage in the conversation, I've provided a Facebook group. where there we can have, I find, better conversations than the chat section, you know. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and remember your great remembrance. Every moment is a moment for the whole cosmos. Let us be responsible for the cosmic landscape now, you know. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.